Hello and welcome. This is the Bits vs. Bytes podcast. I am your host, Ama Grigic, and today with me is Ali Niknam. He's a founder for Bunq, and he's going to tell all about what they do. And I would like to welcome you to the podcast.
Thank you for having me. It's cool to be here.
Yeah, it's cool to be here as well because we're recording at your office, which
true.
is a little bit different for me. Normally, I record at our office, but it's nice to have a change of scenery. So, could you tell me a little bit about your background and how you started Bunq, actually?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a coder by heart and a coder by trade. I started coding when I was 9. Back then, I still had like this really old school computer with cassette tapes in it. So
Really?
That's how old I am.
Yeah.
Sorry.
That's not old.
Yeah. And to the best of my knowledge, so I started investing in stocks when I was 12. I had my first business when I was 16. I founded TransIP when I was 21, which is the biggest web and domain name registrar in the Netherlands. And of course, we also do cloud solutions like VPS. I heard you're a happy customer.
Yeah,
so that's
happy
nice
customer for years.
Yeah, that's cool. That's cool. And then as things were going really well, oh, by the way, I also built a data center or two. Before I forget. And because things were going really well, I decided to take a step aside and give the guys at TransIP the room to flourish and to grow because they are and were very talented. And then suddenly I had all this time on my hands with which I had to do something. And so I decided to write a book at first. In Dutch, it's called Ondernemers hebben nooit geluk. I think it loosely translates to entrepreneurs never catch a break.
Yep.
And then as I was writing the book, the financial crisis and the doom and gloom started to happen, start to get worse. And I figured, hey, why isn't nobody really addressing the issue? Why isn't nobody really fixing the underlying problems? And me being an entrepreneur, I figured, okay, well, then it's up to me to fix it. And so it all started.
Yeah, so that's also the reason. The reasoning behind Bunq is actually that you saw that a lot of things are wrong with this kind of banking world or the banking sector, or there are some things that could be solved, right?
Yeah, I think the core, in our view, the core of what's wrong in the banking sector, in the financial industry, is that it's so uniform. Everything is the same. Yeah. All banks are the same. All banking products are the same. If you walk in a bank branch and you apply the stickers and the labels of another, you can tell the difference.
Yeah, exactly.
And so we figured, when you look at nature, it doesn't matter how strong or weak the crop is. If the crop is uniform, it's going to have a problem sooner or later. It's going to have a disease or it's going to be wiped out. And the way nature solves this is by having diversity. You have different crops that are all different in their strengths and weaknesses. And so when one flourishes, the other grows less and vice versa. And so in our vision, in our view, the only way to really fix the financial industry is to introduce players that are different. And so for a customer perspective, for an end user perspective, this is super important because suddenly you don't have just one choice. Suddenly there is a choice. There's this freedom of choice. And suddenly you can pick and choose something that really fits with you, that resonates with you, that you like, that you love to use.
Yeah. And I was looking at it from an end user's perspective as well, is that I see it as a bank, or from a consumer point of view, it's a bank. But I also see it as a kind of a technology company as well, because you're doing things differently than most banks are doing. So could you elaborate on that a little bit? So how do you see it? Do you see it more as a bank or more as a technology company that is also a bank at the
We're
same
definitely a tech company.
Yeah.
We're definitely a tech company. We just happen to be in the financial industry right now.
Yeah.
But the people that work here, my own background, I mean, your surrounding, I don't think there are any banks,
No, it doesn't look like this.
Right? So, but for us, we're trying to apply the same customer-centric approach, the same, make your life easy approach to banking.
Yeah.
For instance, I think it's out of this world that with traditional banks you still need to visit branches. That just costs you so much time, and at Bunq you never have to, because all you need is in your phone. So you can do whatever you want, whenever you want, and with whomever you want by just using your phone. And this has always been a really strong paradigm.
Yeah, because you can open an account from your phone, right? That's for me is a kind of a game changer. Because opening a bank account normally involves you going to a branch, as you said.
And just costs time.
Yeah, it costs time, and that's all. When I try to open a Bunq account as well, is that everything about it says, okay, I want to help you digitally, and I don't want you to come over. You can't even come over. That's a little bit like you did with TransIP as well. When you look at it, it has that kind of parallel to it. Would you agree?
Yeah, I definitely agree. Because back when we started TransIP, which is ages ago, to register a domain name, which is an internet product, you needed to go and print a form, set a signature on it. You remember?
Yeah, I remember.
And then fax it. And I was like, "What? You can't possibly be serious." And so we started with TransIP with a very simple idea, which is, it's a digital product. You should be able to digitally create it, and maintain it.
Yeah.
And we're doing the same thing with banking. I mean, I believe 70 or 80% of the payments in the Netherlands are digital. Everybody has a smartphone. It's just not of this time and age anymore to require you to do physical stuff. I mean, there are so many benefits in doing everything digital. It's faster, it's safer. You can do a whole lot of stuff you couldn't do before. Just easier, saves you time. It's just great.
Yeah. And I was wondering about because this seems like a real ordeal to get done. I mean, everybody knows that the banking sector is really regulated and stuff like that. So what are some of the kind of challenges you faced when trying to start actually this whole company that you're started right now?
There are so many. There are so many.
Don't
get me started.
Yeah. But what are kind of the biggest things that I think that, for example, getting a banking license is one big challenge, right?
Yeah, it's slightly more doable today than it was when we did it, because you have to know that back when we started, it had been 35 years since the last greenfield permit. All the regulations and the processes, there was nobody around anymore that knew how this worked. And in those 35 years, there had been so many new rules and regulations that had been added that there really wasn't a process for a greenfield banking permit. And in cooperation with the Dutch regulator, we actually came up with a process that's being used today in the entirety of Europe. So we kind of invented that.
Crazy.
Yeah. And that was just the beginning. I mean, this was in a time where basically regulators were saying, okay, it's a giant mess now. We're not going to allow any radical changes. We're not going to allow any new banks. And we pulled it off. So this was a huge thing. And I think ever since then, it's always been this, in Dutch we call it spanningsveld. I don't know,
it's kind of, I know what you mean. It's kind of... it's more sort of tension. There's a tension,
tension between applying the latest, technology and the most user-friendly, user-centric, time-saving approach on the one hand, and on the other hand, doing stuff that the regulator actually allows you to do, which always complicates things. So,
I'm thinking about it because looking at that sector, everybody has a kind of a view of an old dusty sector that hasn't come a long way from where they were like 10 years ago or something like that. So I would love to have your opinion on that. How do you look at it from perspective? Now you've been in the banking sector for a while. How do you look at it right now? So do you think there's a lot going on, or how do you look at it?
Well, first of all, I can imagine where that feeling stems from. I mean, I think it has a lot to do with all banks being the same, all traditional banks being the same. and end customers and end users rightly having the feeling that there's not much to choose from. I mean, it doesn't really matter whether you go with ABN AMRO, or ING, or Rabo.
Yeah.
It's not that they're good or bad. It's just that they're all the same.
Yeah. Fees may differ between those, but
only slightly.
That's
only
slight
slightly.
changes,
I mean, you're talking about a couple of euros a month.
Yeah,
I don't think that's really.
No, that's not a deal breaker in a sense.
Precisely. So, I think the biggest differentiation today is that some of the traditional banks are slightly more digital, like ING, and some of the traditional banks are slightly more locally present, like Rabobank. That's like the biggest difference you can see.
Yeah.
And so I think with the birth of Bunq and with our launch, that was a huge game changer. I mean, suddenly you could choose for a bank that was really different in every fiber of its existence.
Yeah.
And I think what we've seen happen is that this brought on such a shock to the market because we were the first in 35 years.
Yeah.
That the other big banks suddenly woke up and were like, uh-oh,
we need to do something.
We need to do something now.
Yeah.
And I think that if you look at innovation the 5 years before Bunq and 5 years since Bunq, it's undoubtedly clear that many of the things that we introduced as the first in the whole world have sparked off inspiration to the more traditional banks to try to copy it, sometimes successfully, sometimes unsuccessfully. And so I think, to answer your question briefly, if you look at the traditional banks, they do change, they do innovate. Especially now that we're around.
They have to.
They have to.
Yeah.
But they still are all the same.
Yeah.
And so for people who like to experience something different, for entrepreneurs, for instance, who like to save time as much as possible, for people who are concerned about what happens with their money, for people who like to have the absolute best user experience that's possible, for those people, there's Bunq.
Yeah. So why do you think that those kind of old traditional banks struggle to do what you do? Is that also partly because you had like a, as you said, it's a greenfield product, so you started from scratch, right? They don't have the luxury to do that. Well, actually, they could, but they don't do it. That's the strange thing. They could maybe create a new startup or something like that from there. So, why do you think that is? Why do you think that the kind of traditional banks still struggle to innovate the way they used to? Is that also because they have like old systems and stuff like that? Do you think that that's the case?
Well, honestly, I think the traditional banks are really good at what they do, which is being a traditional bank.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no other company out there that can be a better traditional bank than a traditional bank.
Yeah.
And I'm not a person to say the traditional banks are evil.
No.
I mean, they're just
a bank.
They're just a bank.
Yeah.
And you can't be everything, right? So I think sometimes people expect companies to change in ways they are just not built to do.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a reason why Tesla was the first to come up with a viable electric car. There were so many car manufacturers out there, not just in Europe, also in Japan, in the US. I mean, globally, there was not one existing car manufacturer that came out with a viable electric car. This is just an example because you see this happen over and over again. And I think it's just a natural process. I mean, you have a company that does something really well, it grows and grows and grows, it becomes the dominant player in that field, like the current existing traditional banks are. They're the best in what they do. And then times just change and new players emerge, and they someday, hopefully, they become the new status quo.
Yeah, and I think that's correct, because what I'm seeing is talking to people from, for example, ING as well, is that they're more and more getting into that kind of mindset to create different departments or maybe even different startups that will create something like Bunq does as well. But they've missed the boat. They have missed the boat. They had to do it earlier. That's the kind of idea.
Well, if I'm totally honest, I think if I would have a traditional bank, if I would have a traditional car manufacturer, if I would have a traditional newspaper, I would just focus on being really good in what I do because that's who you are.
Yeah.
If you are a vegan restaurant and vegan goes out of fashion for
whatever reason, yeah,
it doesn't suddenly make you capable of cooking a good steak. You're still a vegan restaurant.
Yeah,
times have changed, but that doesn't mean your skills have changed.
Yeah, that's a good one. I didn't think about it like that, but it is. I think it's really hard to, even the whole digital transition was already hard for a lot of banks because that's apparent. I mean, and creating something totally different, yeah, you would need to start from scratch. That's what you did.
Yeah.
And what do you think kind of the next to, of course, being you can innovate faster and stuff like that, what are kind of the advantages to starting from scratch as well? Are there other advantages that you had opposed to, for example, traditional banks?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, we're lightweight, right?
Yeah.
We're much closer to our end users.
How many, sorry to interrupt, but how many people do you have, like, for instance, in the office?
80
at the moment, yeah. If you said that against a traditional bank, which has thousands of people employed, that's really lightweight.
Yeah, we're significantly more efficient. We're quicker.
Yeah.
We're closer to our users.
Yeah.
I think we understand them better. And so I think those are the advantages. Now, banking being a regulated industry, in a non-regulated industry, you already have, of course, the difficulties of competing against big incumbents, right? They've already divided the market. They have a lot more profit. They have a lot more everything, basically, and you're just small and lightweight.
Yeah, exactly.
Now, in a regulated industry, on top of that, things are way more complicated because rules favor the incumbents. They protect the incumbents. So that makes it even more difficult to us. So I guess maybe as a thinking exercise, if your listeners think that something should really change in the financial industry, if people haven't forgotten the financial crisis, if people are fed up with the service they're being provided, it is up to them. It is up to you
to change it
because you can choose with your wallet.
Yep. Yeah, that's sick. Yeah. I totally understand because that's the way I look at it as well. Is that if you want to change something, you kind of need to start something that's going to change it because that's
or be part of the change
or be part of the change, right?
Yeah.
So is being a tech company or because I think you look at it that way as well, is that also something that you look for when you for example hiring someone? So do you look at it from a perspective of I want to have someone that maybe doesn't have any experience in the banking sector, right? So you really want to look at the people that maybe don't have the experience in that sector because they give a fresh view on something like that. Is that something that you also look at when, for example, hiring?
Well, when we hire people, we focus on the mindset.
Yeah, exactly.
And a couple of things are important for us. So we are competing against the big guys, right? And it's a very tough industry. So the people that work here need to have that tough mindset. So many of the people here used to be like top sporters, or we have people that play the violin at a high level, play the piano at a high level, like all the persons that are used to performing steadily at a high level. So that's one part of the mindset that we look for when we hire. The other part what we look for when we hire is for people to have that tech mindset. They don't need to be in tech. They don't need to be a coder. I don't care whether they have been at a bank or not. As long as they have the tech mindset, it's fine. And the tech mindset basically means that you look at things objectively. You look at things from a user's point of view. So, customer centricity is baked in your heart.
Yeah.
and you come up with solutions.
Yeah.
There's no politics. There's no, hey, I'm head of, I have this title, whatever. That's all irrelevant. So the people that have that excellence mindset, so to say, and combine that with the tech way of thinking, all of those are always welcome at Bunq.
Yeah, that's interesting, because mostly people, and that's what you see usually, is that they say, okay, we need a developer, for example, and they really look at, okay, can he or she develop, and they don't look at, okay, can he or she go through that. For example, when you have a problem, it's not enough to be just a good developer, right? You
need to fix it.
You need to be able to go through maybe a few stages of kind of air quotes pain.
Yes.
Any
real developer knows what it feels like. Feeling lost and then having your eureka moment. And then, it's the thing.
Actually, it happens in developers, but it happens in infrastructure, where I come from as well, is that you're like, okay, you're trying to solve a problem for like hours.
Yeah.
And you just don't get it. You ask everybody to kind of help.
Yeah.
And then the next day you wake up and you suddenly know what the problem is, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that
what the solution is.
What the solution is. But that's something that I've noticed as well as that's what I tell people as well, is that I always say I want to hire for passion, right? So if someone has a passion for doing something, they will probably succeed. But that's
I agree.
In most cases that's the case. You will just say, okay, this is, for example, my passion. I like developing or whatever, and if you really love it, you will get it to the end product. And that's something that I also believe in. So it's interesting to hear you say that as well. Is that it's just totally up to the person to get to the end product, and it's a passion thing in my opinion. So what I also wanted to ask is that you've been growing a lot. So you've started in I don't know exactly which year. When did you start Bunq?
We started November 2012.
Yeah. So
but
it's
then
about
without anything, right?
Yeah,
so it took a couple of years to get a banking permit.
Yeah.
Couple of years. That's how difficult it is. And
you heard that
did
correctly.
It in record speed.
Yeah.
We launched in November 2015.
Yeah. Okay.
So we're like 3 years now.
3 years up.
Yeah.
And you've grown a lot,
yeah.
since that.
People recognize the Bunq colors now.
Yeah.
On the
yeah,
street,
that's crazy.
right?
Yeah. And I think that that must be for you also interesting to see. Is that when
I'm very proud. I'm very proud when that happens.
When you see people say, okay, yeah, you Bunq, I know that one. I've seen that.
Yeah.
I've seen that.
Yeah.
But what I was wondering about is that do you feel like there's a kind of a culture shift within a company when, for example, you're growing at the pace you're growing right now? So how do you see that? What happens when, for example, you've been for 20, 30 people and now you're at 80, right?
Yeah.
What kind of changes do you see within a culture then?
Well, I think what happens at Bunq at least is there are two things going on.
Mm-hmm.
One is the culture is not a static thing.
No.
Culture always changes. And what I've noticed is that we have grown, we have converged, we have grown closer, which is really interesting to see. I wouldn't have
That's crazy
anticipated
with more people, because
Yeah.
usually the kind of thing is that when there's more people, the people kind
You
of
grow
go apart. Yeah.
But with us, so that's interesting. And I think that has to do with, when we started, we were a couple of really hardcore developers. Then we had a really hardcore legal people, really hardcore finance people. And it wasn't a melting pot yet. And now it is. Because there is no other company where you have to be great in developing and legal and finance at the same time.
Yeah.
So there aren't any people around that have the experience of being able to communicate. I mean, you know as well as I do, communicating with the developer is different than communicating with a legal guy.
For sure.
And so it took some years to figure that out. And I see us converging, and I'm very pleased to see that happen.
Cool.
Second of all, when you start, it's mostly it's like 90% R&D, 10% ops.
Mm.
Now operations are a thing, right? we're growing.
You've grown
customer
to
support is a thing. The load on the systems is a thing. We actually, for the first time, need to start optimizing for the load on the systems because sometimes it's slightly too high. So that's fine. It's all maintainable.
That happens.
That just happens as you grow. And so it's really interesting to see how we can maintain our strong user-centric focus despite all this operational pressure.
Yeah, and that's the hard part. I talked to Picnic a few podcasts ago, and they have the same problem.
With
right?
yours?
No, I talked to Daniel Gabler, which is the CTO. But they also had that problem, right? They scaled from 0 to to a lot in a very few years because they were also like 2 or 3 years going at the time. So that's interesting to see. So I would like to pick your brain a little bit about something else. Is that so? How do you look at, for example, technologies that have changed some things in the financial sector as well, like blockchain and the whole Bitcoin cryptocurrency market and stuff like that?
I don't believe blockchain has changed.
The blockchain has not changed, of course, but the kind of rise of those kind of crypto coins and stuff like that.
The rise and fall.
Yeah, the rise and fall. People still believe there will be a rise again, but but how do you look at that? Is that also something that has changed the kind of view of people, how they look at banks and stuff like that? Do you think there is kind of a change by looking at it like that? Do you think that happened?
I think the essence, what it proves,
the
rise of blockchain, what it proves is that people are hungry for change. They're hungry for companies, for technologies, for products that are different from what's around. In the case of crypto, that's, for example, because they worry about privacy, but there are so many other things people are hungry for. I mean, this is logical. If you would go to a restaurant and it would have the best hamburger there is in the world, but you had to eat there every day, and they only had that one hamburger, you wouldn't like it. And this is what's been going on in the financial sector for a long time now. And I think that as you have seen cryptos rise, you will see other technologies and companies rise as well. Now, specifically to crypto, there are some technical issues with cryptocurrencies that make them very difficult to maintain as a currency. I don't want to say I'm skeptical, but I haven't seen solutions for those problems yet. And I think that's going to be essential if these things are going to stay for a longer period.
If you want to make it mainstream and actually have people pay with it and stuff like that. Because the idea, what you're actually saying is that the idea behind it is good, right? And also
definitely.
And also the fact that it changes something within that financial sector is also a good thing.
It's also a good thing.
But there is, of course, the kind of non-regulation is a thing. And it's not stable at all. I mean,
the currency value itself is not stable, which is always very important for a currency. I mean, you can see some countries in the world where inflation is high, those currencies are unstable too, and that just has a devastating effect on the economy. Secondly, the efficiency of cryptocurrencies are really a problem. It just takes so much energy. I mean, in this world where we need to be careful and conserve what we have, it just costs so much energy to do a simple transaction, and it's very slow. So those are just a couple of things, but that's okay, right? I mean, the very first airplane had its issues too. The question is not whether there are issues or not. The questions are whether the issues are addressable.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, you had all the kind of issues as well when you started your company, and you solved
we need to have a banking permit, and we need to have this, and we need to have that.
It's crazy to me that it cost years when you say that. On the other hand, I kind of expected it to be years for some reason, but it's crazy that kind of.
That's also one of the reasons why banks are so slow moving. I mean, regulation just makes everything dreadful.
So, what do you kind of see in the future, right? Because that's also a hard question to answer. Is that What do you see kind of changing in that kind of banking world for the future? Because that's something that a lot of people are thinking about. You're already changing stuff, but what do you kind of see as the next step in that?
Well, there are some scenarios that are possible, but predicting the future is, of course, always difficult.
It's hard, yeah.
In this case, it's near impossible because the future of banking greatly relies on politics and on laws and regulation. If tomorrow crypto, for instance, becomes regulated everywhere, then you cannot predict that. Then that would obviously mean for a different future than if it would be forbidden everywhere.
Yeah.
The future, maybe it's more interesting to talk about the future I would like to see.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
The future I would like to see is a future where the regulation is harmonized across Europe and preferably across the world, because I think it's absolutely ridiculous that you can have a mobile phone contract in one country and the other, and it's all the same and it all works together, but that's not necessarily the case with our financial payment infrastructure. I would like regulation to be redefined. It's not about more or less regulation. It's about, look, we've been adding rules for 40 years. Some of these rules are plainly contradicting. It's like there are rules if you either comply with the one and don't with the other, or you comply with the other and comply with the one.
Crazy, yeah.
It's impossible.
Yeah.
It's impossible to maintain. So I would like rules to become more clear, more actually executional. And then I would like them to not change for a couple of years so that companies such as Bunq, but also newer companies know, hey, these are the rules of engagement, let's go play. I compare it with soccer.
Yeah, sure.
Right?
Yeah.
Soccer has been 11 people against 11 people with 2 goal poles and a ball for a long time now.
Yeah.
And this has allowed the players to focus on different styles of play, different techniques, different training, different everything. Yeah. And this has made the game really exciting. Now, it would be in everyone's benefit, in society's benefit, if that would happen. Costs would come down, efficiency would go up, happiness would go up, diversity in products would go up. So if you're a person that really likes privacy, you could actually get a product that serves that privacy.
Yeah.
If you're a person that really likes ease of use, you could get a product that addresses ease of use. And we would get into an atmosphere where everybody's generally more happy. As a gedachte-experiment. Sorry, my English.
Yeah, as a thinking experiment. Yeah.
As a thinking experiment, you can make the same comparison of communism versus capitalism.
Yeah.
If you go to Cuba, there is one brand of ketchup. There is one type of food in a restaurant. There's one type of beans. Why? Because it's heavily regulated, it's dogmatic, and there's very little freedom of experimentation. We know this. Ultimately, we're applying the same principles to banking. It's just as hard regulated. The consequences are the same. There's very little freedom. All the products are the same. People are unhappy because there's no freedom of choice.
Yeah.
So it boils down to me, but maybe I'm making it too big, between either choosing for a suppressing communistic approach or a liberal capitalist approach.
Yeah, there is. I mean, that's. I think that's spot on. Actually, yeah. As you said, maybe it's a bit too hard of a kind of comparison, but it is like that, right? There is no choice.
Well, except for one, of course.
Yeah, yeah. I know what choice you're taking. So to kind of wrap up, the last question I always ask is, what are you most proud of? So what are you most proud of since you started this whole adventure? Actually, I see it as an adventure, but it's a roller coaster ride, I presume.
There are so many things to be proud of.
Yeah.
There are so many things. The fact that we made it,
that's one.
Here,
yeah.
I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
That's insane. The fact that the other day I was paying with my card in a bar, somebody recognized it. Hey, that's Bunq. Yeah, you guys are doing a really great job. I have one too. I mean, I still get goosebumps. It's great.
Yeah.
Meeting a trans IP user.
Yeah.
You guys made it possible.
Yeah.
I'm using those proceeds to make this possible. That's great. There's so many. I think when you're standing in my shoes, there's so much to be proud of, and
I
so
think
much
so
to be
too.
grateful for.
I think so too.
Yeah.
Very cool, very cool. So, how can people find you? Because is it on Bunq.com? I think it is, right?
Yeah, it's Bunq.com. You can also get Bunq in the App Store or in the Google Play Store.
Sure.
Just give it a try. The first month is for free, and just see how different it is, and look if it is something that pleases you. Don't use it like you do a traditional bank. Use it the way it's intended.
Yeah. Sure. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And for the listeners, you can find the Bits vs. Bytes podcast on bitsvsbytes.com. Also on all major podcast platforms, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, all over the place. So follow us on social medias as well. It's Bits vs. Bytes on Instagram, Twitter, and LinkedIn. And I thank you for listening, and until next time.